All right. Good evening. I call this meeting on social development to order. My name is Katrina Knockleby. I'm the MLA for Great Slave, and I am the deputy chair of this committee. We are currently conducting a public briefing on Bill 77, the Nursing Professions Act. Bill 77 repeals and replaces the current Nursing Profession Act and creates a single regulatory framework for all nurses in the NWT. It standardizes the assessment of credentials and oversight under one regulatory structure. As part of committee's review of Bill 77, we are holding a public hearing, which is being live streamed on all Legislative Assembly channels. Thank you to those for listening in and to those here in attendance. I would like to remind all members and presenters to please pass all questions and comments through myself as the chair. And please wait to be recognized before speaking, as this will allow a smoother transition for our microphones. I will now ask all members to introduce themselves for the record, and we will start with the members online. Thank you.
Caitlin Cleveland, MLA Cam Lake.
Lisa Semler, MLA Nuvik Twin Lakes.
Good evening, Rylan Johnson, MLA for Yellowknife North.
Thank you, and I will now pass this over to the Minister of Health and Social Services to introduce herself and to proceed with opening remarks and her presentation.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Madam Chair, I'm pleased to address committee today on Bill 77, the Nursing Profession Act. With me to my immediate left is Jessica McGuire, Assistant Director of Policy, Legislation and Intergovernmental Relations. And next to her is Heather Reptash, Senior Policy Advisor. Behind me is Joanne Giacchetto, the Deputy Minister, Jeannie Matheson, the ADM of Finance, Policy and Planning, and my special advisor, Elizabeth King, along with Vivian Silverio, the president of the Registered Nurses Association of NWT in Nunavut, and Denise Bowen, the executive director of that organization, and some other friends and allies. Okay, happy Nursing Week, everyone. I would also like to, Madam Chair, for the purpose of this bill, as you said, is to repeal the current Nursing Profession Act and replace it with a new act that will establish a single regulatory framework. It's important to know that the department worked closely with the Registered Nurses Association of Northwest Territories in Nunavut throughout the development of this bill. The bill also proposes to repeal the Licensed Practical Nurses Act and transfer the authority to regulate licensed practical nurses from the Department of Health and Social Services to the Registered Nurses Association of NTNU. The bill will establish new nursing designations, scopes of practice, registers, and associated requirements for the licensed practical nurses, as well as registered nurse authorized prescribers, registered psychiatric nurses, registered psychiatric nurse authorized prescriber, and registered nurses and nurse practitioners will continue to be regulated under the Act. The bill sets out authorized prescriber designations for registered nurses and registered psychiatric nurses who meet certain requirements. These nurses will be permitted to order and interpret specific diagnostic screening tests, make diagnosis, and prescribe specific medications. The bill further proposes a modernized process for the review of conduct of members. Most notably, this includes the addition of a complaints officer, as well as a requirement that employers report to RNANTNU if they terminate a nurse or if the nurse chooses to resign instead of being terminated due to unprofessional conduct. The bill gives broad bylaw-making powers to RNATNU to regulate the practice of nurses, including virtual care nurses. This will allow RNATNU to assume responsibility as the regulator for all nursing professionals in the NWT. The bill will also update the name of the regulating body to the College and Association of Nurses of the Northwest Territories in Nunavut. RNATNU has always functioned as both a regulator and professional association and this will ensure their dual function is clear to the public and their members. The language of the Act has also been modernized, including by using gender-neutral pronouns. I would like to take this opportunity to thank committee members for the time and care they've taken in reviewing and responding to this bill. I would be pleased to answer any questions the members may have. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Minister, and your staff for presenting to committee today. Members, I would open it up now for any questions. MLA Cleveland, please go ahead.
Yes, thank you very much, Madam Chair, and thank you very much to the Minister and her staff for joining us here this evening and presenting to committee, especially during Nurses Week, so it's a very timely week. My first question is in regards to the complaints officer position. Can the Minister speak to whether or not that complaints officer position would be found within Renatnu, or previously known as Renatnu after the bill moves forward? And if that position would be funded by Health and Social Services if it is found within Renatnu. Thank you.
Thank you, MLA Cleveland. Madam Minister?
Yeah, thank you. I'll ask Ms. McGuire to answer that, please.
Where?
So the complaints officer would be within Renatnu, and it would be funded from within Renatnu as well, as opposed to the department.
Thank you. MLA Cleveland, do you have a follow-up?
Yes, I do. Thank you so much. My next question is in regards to the LPN licensing fees. I understand that within the Northwest Territories, the LPN licensing fees are roughly $200 above the national average. And I'm wondering if the Minister can explain why that is, if that is related to kind of labor costs in the North, or why. And also what that means for temporary certificate holders, and if they would end up having to pay a second registration, or how that works with another registration that they might have, or once they are registered in the territory, how that kind of becomes prorated. Thank you.
Thank you, MLA Cleveland. Madam Minister?
Thank you. The licensing fees are set by Renatnu themselves, and in many cases, the employer will pay for the licensing fee. That most often is the GNWT. The fee for a temporary certificate is $289 for a registered nurse, and $325 for a nurse practitioner who is working on a temporary certificate. So those are the rates, and as I said, they are set by the association. They are self-governing.
Thank you for that. Are there any other members that have questions for the Minister and staff? MLA Cleveland, do you have another question? I think MLA Cleveland is just looking for her button. Go ahead.
Yeah, thank you so much, Madam Chair. Another question I have was in regards to some feedback that we received from the Canadian Nurses Protective Society, and they indicated that the clause within the bill that is subsection 20 brackets 1, I believe brackets T, that speaks to the insurance that the board of directors can get for nurses within the territory, and it describes specifically insurance, and the Protective Society is suggesting that maybe language around insurance or protection might better capture the organizations that are providing that type of a service within Canada. And I'm wondering if the Minister or staff is able to comment on that, and if they need to take that away, that's fine as well. Thank you.
Thank you, MLA Cleveland. Madam Minister?
Thank you. I'll ask Ms. McGuire to answer.
Ms. McGuire?
Yes, so that is language that was carried over from the current act. We did receive a copy of the submission from the Canadian Nurses Protective Society, and we have no objections to adding that language into the bill.
Thank you for that. MLA Cleveland, did you have a follow-up?
I'll see if my colleagues have a question, and then I might go back on the list, please, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Other members, are there any questions for... yeah, go ahead, MLA Semler.
Thank you. I'm just, one of the questions that I had is just under the designations that are being added, and I was just trying to find it in my own notes. I've got too many things open. sorry. I'm just got, like I said, I have too many pieces of paper open on my screen. So it keeps bouncing back. Sorry. The nurses that are going to be the new designations of psychiatric nurse, registered psychiatric nurse, and I'm just wondering with the practical nurses, you know, I'm just thinking with the new designations and the jobs and any of the people that are sitting in these positions currently, will that change any parts of their, because it's supposed to change their scope of practice. So is that going to, all of those job descriptions are going to go back to reevaluated and possibly change in their pay and things like that? So I'm just wondering if that's something that's further down the road, but if that's more work that needs to be done with this changing of this act.
Thank you. Madam Minister?
Thank you. I'll ask Ms. McGuire to answer.
Thank you, Ms. McGuire. Go ahead.
Yeah, that's a great question. So for licensed practical nurses, their scope of practice under the bill is actually, it's really just being clarified. Under the current LPN Act, it's very, very narrow, and there's really not much of a scope listed in there. So as far as their job descriptions go, theirs should really remain the same. Where we'll see the biggest change will be for registered psychiatric nurses, because they're not currently regulated in the NWT. So right now, as a condition of their employment, they're required to maintain licensure in another jurisdiction. So what they will need in their job descriptions is for those to be updated to reflect that they are required to be licensed in the NWT. And we've been corresponding with the Health and Social Services authorities to make sure that they're aware of these changes that are coming.
Thank you for that. MLA Semler, do you have a follow-up?
No, I just wanted to make sure that those things are going to be looked at if we're going to be putting more scope, because I know all job descriptions are supposed to be being reviewed with all of this new Indigenous framework to make sure that barriers are removed out of them. So I'm just wondering to make sure that those are also going to be like those jobs that are going to be reevaluated as well. So thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else like to ask, or back to MLA Cleveland? MLA Cleveland, go ahead.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. And I just have one last question, just in regards to some of the conversations that we've had on the floor of the House from different members over the course of this term in regards to cultural safety. And I'm wondering if the minister can speak to whether or not kind of preamble or clauses in regards to cultural safety or mandatory cultural safety training came up as part of the drafting of this bill, and I guess where the department sees that type of information best sitting as far as employment of nurses across the territory. Thank you.
Thank you, MLA Cleveland. Madam Minister?
Yeah, cultural safety is its own division within the Department of Health and Social Services. So I don't know if there is a separate, if there's something separate in that applies specifically to nurses, or whether they're covered by the whole division. I'd ask you to call on Ms. McGuire. Thanks.
Thank you. Go ahead, Ms. McGuire.
So the Health and Social Services authorities do have their own cultural sensitivity training that they offer to staff. And as far as, I suppose, like a more legally binding type of framework around cultural safety, that would typically be seen in standards of practice, which we're seeing coming into place more and more across the country.
Thank you. MLA Cleveland, do you have a follow-up?
Yeah, thank you very much, Madam Chair. And I guess, is making this training mandatory for healthcare professionals within the GNWT a direction that health is going? Thank you.
Thank you, MLA Cleveland. Madam Minister?
To the best of my knowledge, nurses have to do the Living Well Together. All the health professionals, all the staff have to do Living Well Together. And I'm not sure if there's anything additional that they have to do.
That's it.
That's it. They have to do the Living Well Together training.
Thank you. Are there any other questions for the minister and her staff? Yeah, go ahead, Emily Semler.
Yeah, no, and I think, sorry, I'm trying to get my notes. I had to change locations where I was attending this. So, the last question I have is that the name change, with the Renat New, that's going to be in here. And I know that, our act covers NWT, but I think there's some overlapping stuff with Renat New that is Nunavut, and I'm just wondering, is the department, corresponding and with Nunavut in some of the work that's being done?
Thank you, Madam Minister.
Yeah, this is work that's been done in consultation with Nunavut, and we're aligned on what we are trying to accomplish in this. But I'm not sure that they're at the same place legislatively that we are.
Thank you, and I think we're actually having a conversation with them as well about our cross, all the legislation in common. Is there anything else? Emily Semler, did you have a follow-up to that?
No, I just wanted to make sure they were part of the discussion as well. Like, I know that we have our own legislation, they have their own legislation, but we're very similar, and this kind of is an overlapping for both territories. So
Thank you. I imagine Nunavut will be very happy to take whatever we've done and run with it as well. So if I don't see any other questions, then I think we will say thank you to the minister and her staff for joining us here this evening. I'm going to now invite Ms. Denise Bowen, the Executive Director of the Registered Nurses Association of the Northwest Territories and Nunavut, to come join us at the witness table. Do we generally take a break? No, okay. Just go ahead. Thank you. Welcome to joining us here tonight. We'll get you to introduce yourselves for the public record, and then please proceed with your presentation.
Thank you, Madam Chair. My name is Vivian Lee Silverio Chua. Good evening to everyone. I am the current president of the Registered Nurses of Association of the Northwest Territory in Nunavut. If I remember it correctly, 4 years ago, my sibling, Romel Silverio, who was the president of Renano at the time, and previous Minister of Health, Abernathy, have signed a memorandum of understanding to have this Bill 77 open. And I am very humbled and very excited that it's going to be another Silverio that's going to see this through. So again, thank you very much. We want to thank the Standing Committee on Social Development for the opportunity to provide comments. We also want to thank the Department of Health and Social Services for the opportunity to consult during the development of the bill. And we appreciate the privilege of self-regulation of registered nurses that is granted by the government through this legislation. We want to welcome the licensed practical nurses and the registered psychiatric nurses into the association and look forward to collaborating with them on the development of bylaws, standards, and scopes of practice that are guided by legal context of this legislation. As this week is a special week, please allow me to greet all nurses Happy Nurses Week from the bottom of my heart. In saying so, I would like to give the microphone to our Executive Director, Denise Bowen.
Go ahead, Ms. Bowden.
Hi, my name is Denise Bowen, and I am the Executive Director of the Registered Nurses Association of the Northwest Territories in Nunavut. So I have a mass of papers here. I was prepared for a lengthy discussion. What I would like to say is that we appreciate this opportunity to come here to speak on behalf of the Nursing Association in this legislation, which means a lot to us. We're really excited about that. I got to take my glasses off. Okay. The only thing really that I actually am going to speak to right now is talk a little bit about, so the mandate of the RNATNU is to protect the public. And when we're looking at discipline, part of it is we're looking at the remediation and improvement of a nurse's practice rather than being punitive where possible. So this legislation, I think, recognizes that and gives us a variety of opportunities to, with undertakings and settlement agreements, to help nurses become better at practicing. Regarding the cultural competence piece that was asked, this comes in our, it's in our entry-level standards for both NPs and RNs, and when we're regulating the LPNs and RPNs, it is a competency. We work well with the colleges and the Southern colleges regarding what we believe needs to be in the program. So truth and reconciliation, cultural community, cultural safety is a big part of what the colleges provide to the students. Once the students graduate and they become part of us, we have standards, and our standards speak directly again to that the nurse needs to have an awareness and understanding and practice in a place of cultural humility and safety. So we have the standards, we have the entry-level competences, we also have a scope of practice, and our scope of practice also speaks to cultural safety and cultural humility. And so these are the documents that most nurses are very aware of and are required to read when they come to the Northwest Territories or Nunavut. We ask them to read our standard scope and our entry-level competencies so that they're aware. We take this responsibility seriously, and I wanted to thank Ms. Cleveland for bringing that up. So I think that's it. I don't really think I have anything else to say, so unless you have any questions.
Thank you. I'm sure that we will have some questions, so if you're open to that, I'll open the floor to the MLAs. Who would like to start? MLA Cleveland, please go ahead.
Thank you so much, Madam Chair, and I'm very sorry that I'm not in the room today to see some very familiar nursing faces at the end of the table, including an entire family of Silverio nurses that continue to serve the entire territory. So my apologies for not being there in person. My first question, Madam Chair, is in regards to the complaints process. And the way that the bill is currently drafted is I think it's subsection 56 brackets 2 is notification and disclosure of the complaint. And it identifies that a summary of a complaint will be provided to the respondent rather than a copy of the complaint itself. And one of the things that was brought to my attention is that this might leave room for risk of inaccuracies to be conveyed to the respondent. And so I'm wondering if RNATNU sees it being an issue if an actual copy of the complaint is provided to the respondent rather than just a summary to be able to avoid that risk there. And I wanted to just kind of get their feedback on that one. Thank you.
Thank you, MLA Cleveland. Ms. Bowen, did you want to take that one? Go ahead.
So we thought about this one very diligently. We took a look at because there is some standard of practice where the complaint is actually given. With the Northwest Territories and Nunavut, we take complaints. We can take complaints verbally. If the person, you can fill it online, you can take it verbally. And one of the things that we see with our complaints is that within small communities, there's often material within the complaint that is personal and confidential, not related to the actual complaint. And of course, we could redact it, but in some cases, what you're going to be looking at is an almost completely redacted complaint. So the idea that that there could be bias or that there could be misinterpretation of the complaint is something, again, that we diligently look at that, and we try to make sure that we are giving the substantive nature to the complainant, because we want we want the nurse to be able to respond to us as completely as they can. And if they don't have all the necessary information, they can't give us what we need. So we are aware that there could be bias. We are aware that there is misinterpretation, but we also feel that there's a sensitive nature to our complaints that you don't necessarily see in southern jurisdictions.
Thank you, Ms. Bowen. MLA Cleveland, did you have a follow-up?
Yeah, thank you so much. And I guess on the same kind of vein as that complaints process, it's section 59 brackets 1 outlines ways that like a complaint can be dismissed. So if it's trivial or frivolous or vexatious, I'm trying to paraphrase what someone else has said, which doesn't always go well. But so one of the suggestions that came forward was the ability to have an offshoot for alternative dispute resolution. And I just wanted to get kind of the feedback from Renat New on having more language around that within the bill itself, specifically in section 59. Thank you.
Thank you, MLA Cleveland. Ms. Bowen? Go ahead.
Okay, so I would say one of the things that we do is that in the bill you'll see the word undertakings. And the undertakings are the biggest way that we manage our complaints. And so an undertaking would be that a nurse has a complaint and we ask her to take a course, do a reflective paper, there are to read a book and to provide some reflection back to us. And so the majority of our cases go through, not specifically mentioning ADR, but it is the undertaking has the same principles, and we end up with settlement agreements with nurses. I don't have the actual statistic, and I would be maybe underrepresenting it, but I would say 97% of our cases are completed under an undertaking. Because again, what we want to do is we want to help the nurse to be a better practitioner. Previously, in a previous act, all complaints had to be investigated, but we find that on occasion there are malicious and vexatious ones where it's just baiting back and forth is what's occurring. This act gives the complaints officer the ability to dismiss complaints that are vexatious and malicious. However, we've also in this act said that when the complaint is dismissed, there also has to go to the Professional Conduct Committee, which is made up of members of our members. And so they are RNs who are volunteers, not employees of us, have an opportunity to review what was dismissed. And of course, the complainant always has the opportunity to request an appeal on that. So what it does initially is it stops those malicious and vexatious ones from coming. What we're thinking that's going to happen is with the word undertaking, is that we're going to, in bylaw, flesh that out. Bylaw and policy flesh out a little bit more about what undertakings are and how we manage them. So,
Thank you for that. Are there any others with questions? Go ahead, MLA Cleveland, and then MLA Semler, I'll put you on the list.
I'll just ask one so Lisa can get right in there because she's the one with actual nursing experience here. My next question is in regards to the notification of suspension. When I think of, the fact that we do rely quite heavily on locums coming up or, people living in remote communities, one of the concerns that was brought to our attention was not only nurses or in most cases, the GNWT or I guess the licensing body sending out notification of suspension, but that nurses might not receive that in a timely fashion because, they might be nursing up in Ulu or they might be returning home to an out of territory location. And so one of the concerns that was brought up was a recommendation that we include language around confirmation of receipt of notice of suspension be obtained prior to that becoming effective, but you don't want someone, you know, to be evasive either of that notification. And so I'm wondering if there are suggestions from the presenters around how to kind of mitigate the fact that we do live in a remote area of the country. Thank you.
Thank you, MLA Cleveland. Ms. Bowen, did you want to take this one? Go ahead.
I actually would say that that would be something, if we could submit a written response to that question, because we certainly like to discuss it with the department. This is the department's legislation, and we would want to work in collaboration around that specific idea.
Yeah, I think that is always acceptable, and I know we are still accepting submissions on this for the general public until the 19th, was it? We'll just take it, just send it to us. Thank you. Not for, yeah, but otherwise the public as well can also send in submissions. Thank you. MLA Semler, you're up.
All right, thank you. One of the comments that comes up a lot in the House are complaints, you know, with clients of small communities. You know, they're feeling that they're not being heard, they're not being, and then they're feeling that they're being discriminated against, or, you know, there's lots of different things. Like if we can pull up pens or and say like all the times that there's been issues with nursing and complaints, and I think any BFs that the department gets, this is the confusion. And I'm just wondering if Renatnu right now thinks that the complaints officer being built into the legislation maybe can help guide that process to, because, you know, as a past nurse, you know, and knowing that I'm employed by an employer and I have expectations from my employer, but I also am a professional under this professional body, and I have a scope of practice that falls under this area. And if we're saying we're including like the Indigenous, and if we're not being culturally aware and safe with our clients, where, and if this complaint comes through the complaints officer and say not necessarily through the hospital route or the department route, is this somewhere where the Renatnu feels that maybe they're able to deal with, or is this something that they can work with the department on how this could be? And, you know, like you said, it's not about discipline, but it's about educating. So if we know that we're having a community or a nurse that's getting a lot of complaints because they're just not picking up on, they're not fitting into this community, and maybe now it's gone to the complaints officer within Renatnu, how can we, like, you know, it's not your job to discipline and educate them as an employer, but as a, you know, under your scope of practice. So I guess that's my question.
Thank you. Ms. Bowen?
Sure. It's a good question, Lisa, and I think one of the things that we can do, certainly working with the department, we would like to collaborate with them on that, but we're a college and an association, so we have a responsibility for, like, the college has responsibility for individual nurses. The association has responsibility for the profession of nursing. And so in the profession of nursing, certainly there is room for growth in our association to provide more education and training regarding cultural sensitivity and working in communities. I see that we have that opportunity with the association. Also with the college too, there's opportunities on an individual basis where we can help nurses understand the cultural nature of where they're working. I would say that the complaints officer, we've had a similar position, and you would know the Director of Professional Conduct was a similar position. This one is a little bit broader and adds a little bit more. I would think that the complaints officer would also be sensitive to the nature of those complaints as well.
Thank you. MLA Semler, do you have a follow-up?
Yeah, no, I just, because I think sometimes when I hear some of my colleagues bring up their concerns and their issues that they're hearing from, it's this is the problem is that they don't know where to turn because they're going to the department if it's a concern, and then they're being, like, people are coming to them as the MLA, they're putting their complaint forward to the department's coming back saying, you need to go and you know, Renat takes care of this. And then it just feels, and then most of the time, the frustration, and I've seen it in a couple of my colleagues, that it's just like to the point where nobody is answering and nobody's dealing with this issue. So that's kind of where I'm saying, if this complaints officer is taking all the complaints and being able to disseminate them to say, okay, this is something we can deal with, but this one we need to forward on, and maybe that's farther, you know, and that's in collaboration with the department, because at some point, you know, when people keep going to the wrong doors, they just give up. And I think as Indigenous people, we've hit so many walls in the healthcare system that we've all just given up. We've hit so many walls within the education system. We just quit fighting and we just do the best that we can. So I'm just wondering if there'll be more clarity, and if you feel that there might be a way to be more clear with this, with the legislation.
Thank you, Emily Semler. Ms. Bowen?
Lisa, yes, I do. I think when you're talking and you're bringing more of the actual issue out, I do see that the complaints officer would have a role because of the college and the Association for Education. But the mandate is public protection, and so with this complaints officer, there might be an opportunity for more clarity to the public. Like, we could be reaching out not only to nurses, but also to the public, and also some training with the complaints officer and working with the department, so that this kind of circle that people get into where, well, it's not my job and you should complain somewhere else, maybe doesn't happen, that there might be some opportunity. I would say so.
Yeah.
Thank you for that. And not to cut this short, but we do have another presenter to get through before the end of the hour, but we do really appreciate your time and giving us the feedback on the bill, and I'm sure that we will be picking your brain a little bit more. Yes, Ms. Silveria, Joe? Oh, if there's anything you wanted to say, though? No? Okay. No. Thank you so much for coming. Yes, we appreciate it. Yeah. If you didn't hear that, it was a Happy Nurses Week to you, Lisa, as a former nurse. And I think it's like engineering. You're just always a nurse. I'm always an engineer. Teachers are always teachers. So thank you so much for that. So we are going to move now to a virtual presentation. We have Scott Robertson is on the line, and he has submitted as a registered nurse, I believe. Yes. So Scott, can you hear us? The floor is yours.
Thank you. Can you hear me?
We can. Go ahead.
Thanks. Yeah, no, I didn't particularly want to make a presentation. I've submitted a written submission just with a couple of comments, but I will say thank you to everyone for their hard work on this. I've been a nurse in the North for most of my 20-some years career in a number of roles. So the main point that I made in my written submission was really probably a point of clarification, and I'm hoping that the Department of Health and Social Services, the legislative team, can look at this and it's really quite minor I think in terms of a change. But in Section 67, there's a direction that after an investigation, that the association or the college, as it will become, can direct a respondent to pay costs, and there doesn't appear to be any form of appeal of that direction. Unless the person has been ordered to pay costs as a result of a board of inquiry or a complaint process. So I just wanted to make sure that that mechanism exists to ensure that there's not a loophole that there's no recourse for a nurse to respond to that direction to pay costs of investigation without any other. Because that could be put upon the nurse without any other findings, and I just want to make sure that's clarified in the legislation. So that was my my biggest point. And then I'd just like to respond to a couple other of the comments that have been made. The question around scope of practice, I don't remember, and the job description, I don't remember if that was MLA Cleveland or MLA Semler. who brought that up. But for registered nurse and registered psychiatric nurse advanced prescribers, that is an expanded role with increased responsibilities, trainings, and accountability. So I would expect that in a job description would be reevaluated. And I also just like to make a comment and around the role of complaints in general. And I've worked in a number of different roles. I've worked at the department. I've been on the receiving end of I don't know how many BFs and BNs in my life. I've been involved on the employer side of investigations, and I have been an expert witness for nurses who have been investigated, or who are appealing a complaint. And and I understand the frustration that the public can have in terms of where to go, but it's always tough because the main employer in the Northwest Territories is the GNWT, and so you get into this bit of a circle. But it should be really clear that the differentiation is that the employer has a responsibility, whether it's the GNWT or the health authorities or otherwise, to respond and to manage its staff. And the association's role, as Denise Bone has talked about, is the protection of the public and the representation of the nursing profession. So I want to be careful about the muddling of those two pieces to ensure that the college can operate independently and separately, and it's not seen as a way to manage employer issues, because that aside from I know that it seems that it muddies the thing on the public side. But behind the scenes, when you in a complaints process, when you have employer and employee issues mixed together, it becomes very, very difficult about who's responsible for who. So I would just urge caution and perhaps a careful thought around that. But again, thank you to everyone for all their hard work on this. I'm very excited about the new legislation, and I look forward to its implementation.
Thank you for that. I appreciate that. I see a lot of parallels here in this discussion around, again, the engineering profession. It's very similar with the self-regulation, and we actually have the same degree at the university that I went to. We all both get applied science degrees, so I always felt a kinship to nursing. So happy Nursing Week to all of you. Does anybody have any questions then for Mr. Robertson? I do want to just leave a little bit of time if there was anybody in the audience that wanted to speak. We do actually have a fuller room than we've had in the last while, so that is an option. Did anyone want to ask Mr. Robertson anything before? Ms. Cleveland, go ahead. Anybody want to come forward?
Yeah, thank you very much, Madam Chair, and thank you to Mr. Robertson for the presentation. I have had the honor of being both a patient of his and also getting to know him outside of that role as well. So just wanted to say thank you for taking the time to come and present to committee, and thank you for also touching on the differentiation between the role of the employer and the role of the college. It's one that we have had numerous conversations on in committee as to how to kind of easily provide that definition and direction to both our constituents and then even ourselves at times as we navigate helping our constituents through issues. And so I really appreciate that. Thank you.
Yeah, I completely agree with that. Was there anyone that did want to come forward and add anything to the conversation? Everyone's looking pretty content to stay where they are. You're also welcome to send us written submissions if you would like. So I think with that in mind, just because we do have the 7 o'clock coming up for another bill, we will wrap up this portion of this meeting. Thank you so much to everybody for coming tonight and for all the input and really thoughtful feedback. It does make our jobs a lot easier as a committee to know, because I don't profess to know, other than as a patient, what nurses actually have to deal with on a daily basis. So thank you for informing us. Thank you.